After the Awakening. Installment 1, A Field Manual for the Disoriented, Disillusioned, and Devoted, by Shashue Monrauch. Introduction, The Fault Line. You are holding this book because something happened to you. I do not know the specifics. Maybe it was a hospital room, maybe it was a garage, maybe it was a Tuesday at 2 p.m. when the ordinary cracked open and something unnameable poured through. Maybe it was slow, a months-long erosion of everything you thought was solid. Or maybe it was fast, a single night that split your life into before and after, the way a fault line splits the earth. Whatever it was, you know this much: you are not the same person you were before it happened, and nobody around you seems to understand why. Your spouse looks at you sideways. Your friends think you have joined a cult or lost your mind. Your old ambitions taste like cardboard. The things that used to drive you, the career, the business, the status, the 5-year plan, feel like props on a stage you have been pulled off of mid-performance. You did not ask for this. You did not sign up for a demolition. You signed up for a life, and that life has been interrupted by a God who, it turns out, was never as far away as you assumed. If this is you, I wrote this book for you. Not as a teacher, not as a theologian, not as a man who has it figured out. I wrote it as a fellow patient in the same recovery ward, a guy in the Florida heat with a sick mother, a stubborn dog, and a mop in his hand, trying to figure out what it means to follow a king he cannot see into a kingdom he cannot yet fully comprehend. This is not a prescription, it is a field manual. The difference matters. A prescription assumes a doctor who knows your exact diagnosis. I am not that doctor. A field manual assumes a fellow soldier who has been through similar terrain and is willing to share what he has learned the hard way about the geography of the place you now find yourself. The terrain is this: you have had a collision with the living God, not a concept, not a doctrine, not the God of your childhood flannel graphs or your adult intellectual arguments, the God. The one who made the thing your feet are standing on. And that collision has left you disoriented, disillusioned with every system that claims to represent him, and yet more devoted to him than you have ever been to anything in your life. You are disoriented because the old map no longer works. The landmarks have shifted. The compass of your ambition, your self-reliance, your cultural Christianity spins uselessly. You are disillusioned because the institutions that were supposed to help you navigate this, the churches, the programs, the celebrity pastors, feel like machinery designed to process your raw encounter into something manageable, marketable, and ultimately hollow. And you are devoted because despite the chaos, despite the vertigo, you cannot unknow what you now know. You have experienced the word of the Father, and you cannot go back to pretending he is a theory. This book walks with you through 5 movements of that journey. Part 1 meets you in the impact zone, the earthquake, the night the floor crumbled beneath your feet. It validates what happened to you and reframes the disorientation as reorientation, pain as surgery, not punishment. Part 2 walks you into the next morning and the morning after that, the dishes in the sink, the mother who needs her meds, the dog who needs to be fed. It is the crucible where the fire of your encounter meets the floor of your ordinary life, and it shows you that this is where the real transformation happens. Part 3 hands you a wrench and teaches you to dismantle the machinery, the political seductions, the subtle idols, the pride that dresses itself in piety, the systems that would co-opt your raw faith and turn it into a club membership. This section is a detox. Part 4 gives you tactics for the trenches, not vibes, not feelings, not new systems, habits, rhythms, the daily disciplines that keep you connected to the vine when the feelings have gone and the grind is relentless. And the conclusion casts a vision beyond your own survival. It is about building the ark, finding each other, forming the quiet network of people who are done with the show and ready for the real thing. I did not write this in a study. I wrote it in a garage, seated on a cot, with my laptop on an old nightstand table at 3 a.m., with a dog at my feet and a glucometer on my right, with a mop and a bucket of water on my left. Every word has been paid for in sleepless nights, in tears on my knees, in the slow, sacred labor of caring for a mother whose mind is leaving while her body remains. If you are reading this and you feel like you are losing your mind, you are not. You are losing your old one, and the one who took it is building something better. Let us get our boots on. Part 1, the impact, the earthquake and its aftermath. Focus, the seismic event, the fault line between before and after, the disorientation and necessary surrender. Part 1, introduction, the earthquake. There is a moment, and if it has happened to you, you will recognize it instantly when the ground beneath your life gives way. Not metaphorically, it feels physical. The assumptions you built your identity on, your competence, your plans, your theological categories, they do not slowly erode. They collapse, all at once, like a sinkhole opening beneath a parking lot. The Bible has a word for this kind of moment. It calls it kairos, not chronos, the ticking of the clock, the sequential march of Tuesday into Wednesday. Kairos is a point, in my case a rupture in time, the moment when eternity punches through the membrane of the ordinary and rearranges everything. If you are holding this book, you have likely had your kairos moment, and you are likely experiencing its aftershocks. Let me name what you may be feeling because no one else seems to be naming it for you. You feel like a stranger to yourself. The man or woman in the mirror looks the same, but the person behind the eyes is someone new, someone you do not fully recognize. Your old motivations, the career ladder, the social calendar, the business, the retirement plan, feel like relics from a civilization you no longer belong to. You are not depressed, you are displaced. You have been handed a passport to a country you did not know existed, and you are still standing in the customs line of the old one. Your relationships are straining. You cannot explain what happened to you without sounding insane. The people who love you want the old you back. They do not understand that the old you is gone, that the person they are talking to is a first draft of someone being rewritten by a hand they cannot see. Some of them will stay, some will not. The loneliness of this is acute. You are hypersensitive to religious noise. The worship songs that once moved you now sound hollow. The sermons feel like sales pitches. The Christian social media feeds look like a costume party. You are not losing faith. You are losing your tolerance for the counterfeit. The collision with the real thing has ruined you for the imitation. And underneath all of it, there is a connection so profound, so intimate, so present, that it makes every previous spiritual experience feel like a postcard from a place you have only dreamed of. The 3 a.m. silence is louder than any sermon. The nudge of the spirit is more real than any handshake. You are both more alone than you have ever been, and yet more accompanied than you ever knew was possible. This is not a breakdown, it is a breaking open. This section is your first aid kit. The chapters that follow are not theology lectures, they are dispatches from the epicenter, written by a man who felt the same ground give way, who is still navigating the new terrain, and who can tell you with certainty, you are not crazy, you are not alone, and this is the beginning, not the end. Chapter 1 is the map of the moment of impact itself. It names the fault line and shows you both sides of it. Chapter 2 is the field manual for the long, refining process that follows. It answers the question that haunts every newly awakened soul: why does this hurt so much? Chapter 3 is the shift in perspective from fearing the process to accepting it, even welcoming it, as necessary surgery. It transforms the story of Job from a horror movie into an operating manual. Chapter 4 is the 1 year later check-in. It shows that the aftershocks do not end, but they integrate. The tension does not resolve, but it deepens into a strange, sustaining peace. This section will not get you out of the impact zone. That is not the goal. The goal is to help you breathe in it, to show you that the dust will settle, the ringing in your ears will quiet, and the voice that called you into this upheaval will be the same voice that walks you through it. You did not choose this earthquake, but you can choose how you stand in it. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Kairos Split. My life has a fault line running straight through it. The epicenter was a garage with a desk and a cot in South Florida on the night of October 3, 2024. On one side of that line is a man I used to be. On the other side is the man I am now. They share a name, a history, a face, but they are not the same person. One was a tourist passing through. The other is a citizen of a different country, learning its language and customs while still having to navigate the old one. This is the story of that rupture, not a conversion, a collision. If you're hearing this and enjoying it, if it's something you can relate with, if it has lit your path ahead just a bit brighter, then this testimony was for you. Take a moment, hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, let's continue. Part 1. The Before, a tourist in a godless cosmos. Before the fault line, I believed in a god. Note the lowercase g. He was a concept, a logical necessity, the ultimate first cause, the cosmic architect. My prayers, on the rare occasions I offered them, were formal memos sent into the void. I was spiritual, not religious. Religion was a costume party. It was old people facing the diminishing returns of life, hedging their eternal bets. I figured I could be a good person, maybe even a better one without the organizational baggage. Why wear the jersey if you didn't have to play for the team? My world was a game of life. My goal was simple: learn the rules, play smart, accumulate points, success, status, security, and try to win more turns than I lost. God, if he was out there, was the game's original designer. He wasn't a player, he certainly wasn't a coach. He'd built the board and then left the room. My strategy was my own. Then, the board flipped over. It began with my mother. I drove to Florida for what was supposed to be a 2-week administrative trip. Within weeks, a slow fade became a violent collapse. One stroke, then another, then a third. My life, my business, my clients, my plans became a distant echo. I was a man trying to hold up a collapsing house with my bare hands. The primary emotion wasn't sadness, it was rage, a white-hot, directionless fury. Part 2. The Rupture. The night the floor crumbled beneath my feet. On the night of October 3rd, bone-weary and soul-hollow, I finally carved out a moment for a shower, just a few minutes under hot water to try and wash off the clinging film of hospital and despair. That's when the knowing hit. It wasn't a vision, no angels, no beams of light. It wasn't a voice, audible or internal. It was a knowing, a tap on the shoulder of my spirit so concrete, so undeniable, it felt physical. A presence entered the room, or rather the presence that had always been in the room made itself known. God, the one who created it all, was here, had been here. The realization was not gentle, it was an avalanche. It was the catastrophic collapse of every assumption I had ever held. The threefold unmaking, the collapse of distance. The core revelation was spatial, but in reverse. It wasn't that God had drawn near, it was the devastating, beautiful understanding that he had never been far. The distance was always on my end. I had been living my entire life in a brightly lit room, convinced I was in the dark. Every secret thought, every hidden rage, every silent moment of pride or shame, it had all been seen, known, and held in a conscious, intimate attention. Omniscience ceased to be a theological bullet point and became the air I was suddenly breathing. I had never been alone, not for a second. The announcement of personhood. This was not a force, energy, or ideological principle. This was a who, with a will, with a plan, with a specific, undivided attention on me, Shashue, in that garage, in that specific moment of unraveling. The cosmic architect was personal. He knew my name, the divine claim and my bankruptcy, and then the message, not in words, but in a meaning that implanted itself whole into my understanding. Your business, your plans, your sense of control, that is your idol. Your mother's life, her dignity and her decline, that is now your sacred trust. This is the exchange. This is the starting line. It was a royal decree, delivered with an ironclad love. My life's central pursuit, my work, my ambition, my self-built identity, was gently and firmly dethroned. In its place was a single, non-negotiable assignment: care for my mother as if it were my only and highest calling. In that same instant, my rage, my why me, frustration, my entire economy of self-reliance was exposed as worthless currency. I wasn't a capable man weathering a storm. I was a beggar who had been fed every day of his life by a hand he had refused to see. I prayed that night like a drowning man. There were no elegant words. It was gasp and surrender and promise and weeping. It was the end of one world and the violent, glorious birth of another. Part 3. The after. Rehabilitation in the 3 a.m. classroom. For the next 6 months, he set the schedule, 3 a.m. sharp, every morning. Like clockwork, I'd wake, not from anxiety, but from a gentle, unignorable nudge. I'd sit in the dark and pray until dawn broke. This was not punishment, this was rehabilitation. The world's soundtrack was switched off. In that sacred silence, 2 processes began. Unlearning. The values I had built my life on began to lose their shine. Hustle, status, accumulation, personal legacy, they looked like plastic dollar store toys, props on an empty stage. I saw them for what they were, frantic attempts to etch my own name on a world that was dying when my name had already been written in a ledger in an eternal kingdom I didn't know existed. The game was over and I had been playing the wrong one. Relearning perception. My vision changed. A moment of patience with my confused mother wasn't just being a good son. It was participation in a divine kindness. A sunset wasn't just a pretty end to the day, it was a deliberate, loving brushstroke on a canvas meant for me. The world stopped being a random series of events and began to reveal itself as a coherent, authored story. My task was no longer to write my own script, but to find my line in his. Part 4. The tension. In the world, but profoundly not of it. This is the daily reality of the after. Being not of the world isn't about physical escape, it's about a gravitational shift. Engagement versus identity. I still live here. I pay taxes, I have conversations, but my identity is no longer anchored to any of it. Success and failure are now weather patterns. They don't define the climate of my soul. The rotated motivation. I used to act to build a brand, career, social standing, self-image. Now I am learning to act from a place of response. Is this a prompt? Is this a need placed before me? Is this a clear nudge I'm learning to recognize as the spirit? The core question has rotated from, what's in this for me, to a simpler, stranger one. Is this mine to do? The solitude and the solidarity. There is a loneliness to it. You speak a different native tongue in your heart. You feel like an anthropologist, observing your former culture with a new, dispassionate clarity. But this solitude is coupled with a connection so profound, it makes previous relationships feel like surface chatter. The communion in the silent, dark hours is more real, more substantial than any crowded room. The tourist who found his citizenship. October 3rd, 2024, was the day I stopped being a tourist on Earth. I discovered in the most visceral way possible that I held citizenship in a different, interlocking kingdom. I still have to function in the earthly city, but my passport, my loyalty, my marching orders, and my king come from elsewhere. The man I was before that night is a ghost to me now. The man I am after is only beginning to understand what true solidity feels like. It feels like being known. It feels like being given a single clear task in the midst of chaos and knowing it all works out because his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It feels like a 3 a.m. whisper in the dark that is more real than the noisiest day. I don't know why he chose that night or why he chose me and my particular mess. I just know the fault line is real. Everything is now measured as before or after. And the after is a life of listening, waiting for the next nudge, urge, intention, late night call, and obedience. A moment in the workshop. What is the date of your fault line? Can you name the before and the after? If you cannot pinpoint a single night, can you trace the slow collapse that brought you to the place where you finally stopped running? Write it down, not for anyone else, for yourself. Name the rupture. It is the first act of orientation in the new country. Chapter 2, The Furnace and the Form. This morning, the silence was a physical weight. It was the kind of quiet that exists not as an absence of sound, but as a presence. It was the quiet of the workshop before the hammer falls. It was the quiet of the furnace just as the coals reach their peak heat. I sat in it and I understood something with a clarity that felt less like a thought and more like a memory being uncovered. My life split on the night of October 3rd, 2024. I have spoken of that before. The fault line, the before and the after. What I am beginning to see now, from this side of the rupture, is the architecture of the after. The father did not simply welcome a prodigal son home and then point him toward a comfortable chair. He welcomed me home, looked me in the eye, and immediately began leading me down a corridor into a part of the house I never knew was there, the workshop. And in this workshop, he is not building something new from scratch. He is reclaiming what is his. He is restoring an original design buried under 50 years of my own haphazard, prideful construction. The process has a pattern. I have lived this pattern now in cycles for these 20 months. It is not a theory to me. It is the rhythm of my breathing now. It begins always with what looks like an ending. The wide path and its guardrails. We are born onto a 6-lane highway. The world lays it out for us. Smooth asphalt, clear lines, brightly lit. It is the path of human understanding, of talent, of strategy, of self-determination. Its destination is written on every billboard: success, security, significance, on your own terms. I lived on that highway for 5 decades. I was a competent driver. I learned the rules, navigated the mergers, avoided the major wrecks. I built a life in the fast lane, or what I thought was the fast lane. The highway is guardrailed on either side by a simple, powerful deterrent: fear. Fear of scarcity, fear of irrelevance, fear of missing out, fear of losing control. These guardrails are not to keep us safe. They are to keep us compliant, to keep us moving at speed, in our lanes, toward the horizon the world has painted for us. We mistake the hum of the engine for progress. We mistake the mile markers for meaning. The problem is not the highway itself. The problem is that it does not lead home. It leads in a circle, and eventually the fuel runs out. The scenery repeats. The soul grows weary. You find yourself driving through a life that feels increasingly like a simulation, a going through the motions for a prize that, upon arrival, feels like painted tin. This is where the separation begins. It feels like a breakdown, a failure, a personal crushing desolation. In my case, it was the violent collapse of my mother's health, the unmooring of my own identity, the sheer howling vacuum of a future I could no longer control or even comprehend. The wide path didn't just narrow, it vanished. The guardrails of fear were still there, but now they were caging me in a prison of impotent rage. I was desperate. Desperation, the end of the road. Desperation is not a feeling, it is a location. It is the dead end of the wide path. It is the moment you realize your talents are useless, your maps are blank, your fuel is gone, and the guardrails have become the walls of a cell. You are separated, utterly, from the illusion of your own competence. This is the fertile ground. This is the fallow field. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poverty of spirit is not sadness. It is bankruptcy. It is the total liquidation of the ego's assets. I was not poor in spirit because I was sad. I was poor in spirit because I had finally run out of me. There was nothing left in the account of self to draw upon. I was desperate. And here is the first counterintuitive truth. Desperation is the product of separation from the wide path, and it is the essential ingredient for trust. You cannot trust when you are in control. You can only manage. You cannot trust when you have a plan B. You can only negotiate. Trust requires the total absence of an alternative. It requires the "why hast thou forsaken me" of the garden, of the cross. My desperation on that October night was not the obstacle to faith. It was the prerequisite. It was the hollowed out space where faith could finally take root because there was no other competing vegetation left alive. Trust and belief, the seed in the hollow. From that desperation, a single green shoot. What if I am not alone? What if the silence isn't empty? What if the voice I've spent a lifetime explaining away is actually a voice? Belief is not intellectual assent to a list of propositions. It is the turn of the heart toward a possibility. In my case, it was the catastrophic, beautiful knowing that the cosmic architect was not a distant engineer. He was a present father. He had been there the whole time. The separation was all on my end. Trust is belief in motion. It is the leaning of your entire weight onto that possibility. It is the "I have nothing left, and I am choosing to fall into you." It is Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water. He did not understand hydrodynamics. He did not have a backup flotation device. He was desperate to get to Jesus, and the only way was to trust the impossible command, "Come." My trust began with a similar silent command in a garage. care for your mother. This is your work now. I did not understand why. I did not see the purpose. I only saw the impossibility. And in the face of that impossibility, my trust was born. It was not confident, it was terrified, but it was action. I stayed, I cleaned, I listened, I obeyed. Faith, the narrow path through the furnace. This is where the wide path ends and the narrow one begins. Faith is not a feeling of certainty. It is the narrow path itself. It is the act of walking, step by terrifying step, into the wilderness, toward a promise you cannot see, led by a voice you are learning to recognize. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many, for the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. The narrow path does not bypass the hard places, it leads directly into them. It goes through the wilderness, it goes through the fiery furnace. This is the critical misunderstanding. We pray for faith, thinking it is a shield against the heat, but faith is the permission slip to enter the heat. Faith is what allows you to walk into the furnace knowing you will not walk alone. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. Notice, it does not say if you have enough faith, you will avoid the waters and the fire. It says, when you pass through. My narrow path led through the furnace of caregiving, the fire of exhaustion, the flame of grief for a mother who is still here but is gone, the searing heat of a life put on hold. This was not a detour, this was the root. My faith was not proven by being spared the fire. My faith was and is being forged in the fire. And this is the reiterative process. The scrub, wash, rinse, dry, repeat. Scrub, the circumstance arrives, the illness, the loss, the betrayal, the impossible demand, it scours you, it exposes the grime of self-reliance, the plaque of pride. Wash, you cry out, you pray, you are drenched in your own helplessness, you are washed in the reality that you cannot do this. Rinse, the truth of his sufficiency floods in, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. You are rinsed of the lie that you were ever meant to carry this alone. Dry, you rest in the aftermath, you see that you came through, not by your strength but by his, you are dried in the warmth of a peace that passes understanding. Repeat, the cycle begins again, a new challenge, a deeper layer of impurity revealed, another trip through the furnace. Each passage stretches the faith, the muscle is torn so it can heal stronger, the vessel is fired so it can hold more. You are brought closer to the Father not because the path gets easier, but because your dependence becomes more absolute, more instinctive. You learn the sound of his voice in the roar of the flames. The product, transformation into identity. What comes out the other side of each cycle is not a better version of your old self. It is a clearer representation of the being your Creator intended you to be. Christians call this stepping into your identity in Christ. It is not an acquisition of something new. It is the removal of everything that is not you. It is the sculptor revealing the statue hidden in the marble by chipping away the excess. It is the refiner sitting before the crucible skimming off the dross until he sees his own face reflected in the pure metal. But he knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. This is why we cannot boast. We look at the gold of our refined character and think, look what I have become. But the refiner holds up the ladle full of dross, the fear, the pride, the selfishness, the anger that has been burned away, and says, look what I have removed. The transformation is his work. Our part is to stay in the crucible, to trust the heat, to believe the refiner knows what he is doing, even when we feel we are being destroyed. A moment in the workshop. Where are you in the cycle right now? Are you being scrubbed, washed, rinsed, or are you in a brief, blessed moment of drying, resting in the aftermath of a passage through the fire? Name it. And if you are in the heat, can you identify what the refiner might be skimming off the surface? If you're hearing this and it's stirring something, if it's making you look at the headlines, your social media feed, and your own tribal alignments a little differently, then you're listening well. Take a moment, hit like, subscribe, leave a comment, let's continue. Chapter 3, From Dread to the Surgeon's Table. It is 6 a.m. I did not write yesterday, not a single line in my journal. The page stayed blank. The silence was not empty. It was full of the heavy, humming weight of a lesson being absorbed not by the mind, but by the marrow in the bones and the flesh of the heart. I spent the time in the book of Job. A little over a year ago, when I first read that story, my reaction was pure, cold dread. I called it the Job experience. My prayer back then was simple and desperate. God, please, do not choose me for that. Do not make me your nail. The thought of a blameless man being handed over to loss, to pain, to the unraveling of his entire world, was a horror I could not fathom. If God would do that to Job, a man he himself called blameless and upright, what might he do to someone like me? I saw it as pure, unmitigated wrath, a divine hammer lesson, and I was terrified of being the nail. That fear was real. It kept me up at night. It drove me to my knees in a prayer not of communion, but of bargaining. Show me what to do. Let me obey. Just don't give me the Job experience. My perspective has changed. It has been sanded down by the grit of the last year and polished in the fire of this present season. I no longer see it as a horror story. I see it now as a surgery manual. I misunderstood the story. I focused on the hammer and the nail. I missed the surgeon and the table. God did not give Job to Satan because he was angry with Job. He gave him because he had confidence in Job. Have you considered my servant Job? It was a statement of trust. The enemy believed Job's faith was a product of his comfort, his blessings, his hedge of protection. God knew it was rooted in something unshakable. The trial was not a punishment. It was the ultimate validation of a faith that was real. It was the process that would prove that faith, not just to the heavenly audience, but to Job himself. This is the shift. The Job experience is not about what God does to you. It is about what he does in you. It is transformation. It is the meticulous, painful, loving work of a surgeon who sees the cancer of self-reliance, the calcified pride, the tumors of idolatry that we have learned to live with. He does not hate the patient. He loves him enough to operate. I think of an old show, The $6 Million Man. A man shattered and broken is rebuilt. He is given new strength, new capabilities he never had before. But first, he had to endure the accident, then the surgery, then the brutal, grueling therapy. The process was agonizing, but the outcome was a man remade for a purpose he could not have previously fulfilled. God's surgery does not give me bionic limbs, it gives me a bionic heart, a heart that beats in time with his, a spirit that can withstand pressures that would have shattered the old man. He is not building a superhuman for show, he is fortifying a son for war, he is creating a vessel that can carry his glory without cracking under the weight. This is the purification through the fiery furnace. It is not random suffering. It is targeted, precise, and purposeful. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline, so be zealous and repent. The love is in the reproof. The care is in the discipline. I used to pray, don't give me the job experience. Now my prayer is different. Do whatever it takes. Do whatever it takes to burn out of me everything that is not of you. Do whatever it takes to sever my dependence on anything but your presence. Do whatever it takes to make me a fit vessel, a true reflection, a reliable son. If that means loss, let it be loss of what was holding me back. If that means fire, let it be a fire that purifies, not destroys. The storm will come, the rain will fall, the earth will shake, the old me would have been swept away. The man being built on this table, in this furnace, through this job experience, will stand. Not because of my strength, but because the foundation being laid is the only one that cannot be shaken. It is Christ in me. The surgeon is not careless with his knife. He is not wasteful with his fire. He pays this much attention, this agonizing, detailed, moment-by-moment attention, because he is making something. He is not just repairing, he is rebuilding from the foundation up. A year ago, I saw the story of Job and trembled at what God might take from me. Today, I read it and am in awe of what he is determined to build in me. The fear remains, but it has changed flavor. It is no longer the fear of the victim. It is the sober respect of the patient who trusts the surgeon, even as the anesthesia wears off and the cutting begins. I know the outcome is life, a life I could not imagine from this side of the table. So I lay here, on the table, in the furnace, in the wild, lashing storm, and I say, do whatever it takes. The finished work he has in mind is worth every moment of the process. A moment in the workshop. What is your job experience fear? What is the thing you have been begging God not to take? Now ask yourself, is it possible that the thing you are clinging to is the very thing standing between you and the person he is building you to become? You do not have to let go today, but can you open your hand, even slightly, and whisper, do whatever it takes? Thank you for listening. If this resonated with you, if it made you look at the world around you a little differently, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. A brother, a sister, someone struggling to see through the fog of this world. Subscribe, like, and share to be notified when the next installment of this series drops. Until next time, walk in the light you've been given. You can find my writing at shashuemonrauch.com. On social media, I'm at Shashue Monrauch, and I am Shashue Monrauch. Peace and blessings, fam, and I'm out.